What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Men's Wellness Collective podcast, where we have conversations about relationships, men's mental health, and personal development as we support men on their wellness journey. I'm your co host, Jordan Lewis,
I'm Caleb with okay?
Daylen Bernie.
and today we're going to be talking about the barriers to emotional expression. Um, so, Caleb and Daylen, you guys had to suffer the onslaught of like my inspiration this weekend as I was listening to one of many podcasts by a guy named Dr. I think it's pronounced like Gabor Mate or Gabor Matt. You guys can Google him. Not really sure how you pronounce his name,
It
but
sounds very French. It's probably Gabon Martin, and we're
yeah,
so far off.
he's everywhere right now because he's got a book coming out talking about healing in a toxic culture. And one of the big things that kind of one of the big takeaways of the book is about how our early childhood experiences and the way that we raise up children kind of create these emotional wounds that we then have to kind of deal with later in life. So, in the spirit of talking about men's mental health and emotions and suppression and expression and all those things, I thought we would use that conversation to kind of spark our own conversation about how that plays out for men and young boys and some of the barriers that we see getting in the way of like men's ability to identify what they're feeling, be open about what they're feeling, and just experience a wide range of like the whole gambit of emotional expression. So we can use that kind of as a springboard today. But before we jump into maybe the psychoeducation around everything, what do you guys feel about emotional expression? If you could kind of give your own take around what it's been like for you, what you see in the landscape for men today around how we relate to our emotions, like what do you see is the big barriers that we're facing right now?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think like we spoke about last week on the podcast. There's a lot of just hesitancy just around what being emotional means, and especially right now, I think there's a lot of people in the zeitgeist putting out information that's just counterproductive. And so I think one of the biggest hurdles that men and emotion have conflict in is like, what does it mean to be quote unquote emotional? I think emotions have been tied with like, if you're overly emotional, that means you're weak or you're weak and can be taken advantage of. And the
Yeah.
role of a man is supposed to be, you're supposed to be strong, you're supposed to provide, you're supposed to protect. And if you are emotional, that somehow takes away from your ability to be a strong, present man, which is actually antithetical to the truth. One of the funny things that I've noticed is that they'll talk about, oh, you're supposed to be a protector, you're supposed to be strong, you're supposed to be, a leader, and you can't lead anyone, especially like if you're heterosexual male and you're in a romantic relationship, you can't lead your wife, you can't lead a woman if you're more emotional than her. And like kings didn't have like their queens weren't able to talk back to them and blah 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 blah, and like kings make decisions and they lead on their own. That's not true. If you look back at pretty much every civilization in the history of ever, every king and every leader had some sort of council to which they went through to process their emotions. And then I was thinking, I was processing that, I was like, oh, they had therapists. We just didn't we just didn't conceptualize it as like uh King Solomon, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, all these leaders that we put, they had counselors. We just called it having, they had somebody that they went through to talk to. But I think if we can understand that being able to access your emotion actually allows you to be a better leader, a more present partner, a better connector with people. It actually, like, being able to process your own emotion allows you to connect with other people's emotion, which therefore enables you to like know them better, know how to lead them better, know how to be in community and relationship with them. Like it's everything. Like it's the one thing that really separates us from every animal on this planet is our ability to understand our emotions and connect with other people's emotions.
Love that. Yeah, Daylen, what about you?
Man, I love that you brought in like how back in the ancient times, like these great leaders and these great men had people around them that they connected with. Like I didn't know that. I think that's fascinating. That it's like, yeah, they're were just like they talked about their emotions. Like they just talked them through their things, and I feel like as a society have lost that like that tribal connection. Like the only reason we survived was together, and now we live in apartments by ourselves, and we work remotely from home, and like we don't do things together collectively. And part of that, as you were saying, is like it's connecting with another human being, another man about like, what it's like to struggle to provide for your family. Like even if we're doing these things, like it's still hard. You don't have to be perfect at everything you do and be stoic. Like you can still do these, things that men are supposed to do today and still have a hard time of it. I think that's something that so many people don't want to admit, that they don't want to do it on their own or can't do it on their own. Because we were never built to do it that way. We're social creatures.
Yeah. I love that you brought up stoicism, because when I listen to like how Caleb describes these leaders of old who had these councils, that seems like such a far discrepancy from how we think of stoicism now, and maybe something throughout the years has gotten lost in translation, because when I picture stoicism, I think of like stone face, just keep it all in, deal with everything internal. When in reality, some of like you said, the greatest leaders, they were processing and conversing and having these conversations. Even I think of like the Marcus Aurelius's, like if you read excerpts from like his meditations, that dude was so emotional. Like
Yes,
he was
very.
really grappling with like grief and despair and like existential stuff. And it's sad that we've lost that. And today's man thinks that there's no space for them to have that, let alone feel it at all internally. But then like the jump and the leap from that to then sharing that with other people externally, this is such a big gap nowadays. So appreciate you guys sharing your thoughts on that. While we do a little bit of education to kind of give people like a really simple way to think about why it is that we've gotten here to this point. Like why today's man who might be listening to this and feel like, I don't even know at what point, I never like consciously decided I'm not going to share my emotions with anyone. I just know that I'm here right now and my partner wants something from me and wants me to talk about how I feel, or my therapist or whatever. And I can't do it. Sometimes I don't even know how I feel. So maybe we can give them some understanding and a framework to think about like how they got to that point.
Yeah, I think it starts off with kind of just some good old attachment style. That starts off from as soon as you're born, basically. You're thinking of like a newborn baby. It has all these needs that it has. It needs to be fed. It needs to be held. It wants love. It wants attention. Like it wants these things, and it's asking for it. And if that baby doesn't get what it needs, what it's asking for, it will learn over time to repress it, and that its needs don't matter, and that, it'll cope with it on its own by just bottling it up and being quiet. At first it'll, cry harder, cry louder to get more attention, but eventually it'll just stop. And then as, the child gets older, becomes an adolescent, and as a teenager, it's already learned that its parents aren't safe, and it's not going to meet its needs, so it just continues to learn to repress that stuff, and it doesn't need other people, and it can survive just on its own as it gets older. So some of this attachment stuff being normal habits, it starts really, really young, and it gets reinforced as you get older and older, through relationships with your peers, through romantic relationships, still continuing things with your parents, teachers, coaches, whoever. If you ask and don't get help, that negative reinforcement just gets, continued throughout the life.
Yeah, you start to learn that like if I have something that I need and I try to express that I need it, whether it's emotional or not, and that need doesn't get met, or I get a response that's negative, that's harmful, that's fearful or hurts me, and you start to associate like the world with a not safe place. Right. to kind of summarize it. Yeah. I think a lot of men probably walk around that way, right? Like they don't feel safe. That's probably the big word that we could say is like they don't feel safe to express their emotions because when they did, when they were 6 years old and they cried because they were sad, someone came along and told them, "No, we don't do that," or "Go to your room until you're done crying.
Yeah.
So you're alone."
Yeah.
Right? Like all these things.
And I think a lot of that can actually be environmental, right? Like we can get into the conversation of nature versus nurture, but we also, I think, need to like realize that some of this is hereditary in that these thought patterns, these behavior patterns, these emotional regulation or e-regulation patterns are taught generationally. And depending on who you were, where you were, and when you were born, like things just literally might not have been safe to do. I think about like people who were born during the Great Depression. They had like real hunger, starvation concerns. And so like it wasn't about like, oh, you're crying, I need you to stop crying. Like we need to figure out food. Like the crying isn't going to help us. And like that person grows up where like they don't cry because like if they feel like they cry, it causes a burden. And then they pass that on, and then that passes it on. And even though you're so far removed from that trauma of like the Great Depression, you got to think about how many generations it might have been passed down to, where like father to father, father to son, or father to daughter, and mother to daughter, and it just continues to roll downhill. Same thing reciprocally. Like if you were in an environment where things were bad and things were hard and you get positive reinforcement, like you're crying and someone says, hey, well, there's nothing we can do to fix this, but I hear you, I understand you, you then begin to have a secure attachment to that person. You then begin to know that it's okay to share your emotions, and therefore you actually go out there in the world and then you're trying to reciprocate that, and you might pass that down to your kids. But then what happens when someone who's safe with their emotions runs into someone who's not safe with their emotions? That's when we just get the human experience, right? That's what it's all about. That's when we're like, I don't understand like how you don't see it this way. Another person's like, I don't understand what's wrong with you. Why are you this way? And
Yeah.
it's like the beauty of it's the beauty and the scars of like the human experience, right? These things that have been passed down to us and through us, the way we express ourselves out in the world, then interacts with the way everyone else expresses themselves out in the world. And then we have to then balance that out. And I think one of the things that we, at least I know as professional, I try to help other people, like my clients understand is that like, you may be seeing the world in a totally different way than this other person is, or this other person is, or other people in your life are. And you can't be responsible for how they respond, but you can definitely be responsible for how you respond to their actions, right? If they're violating a boundary or whatever, you can choose to set a boundary or remove yourself. Just different ways of emotional regulation and just being, especially like with attachment, especially if we get into relationships. And as men, how do we relate to each other when it comes to emotions?
Yeah. I think a part of that I really like that I kind of never really thought of is like when you talked about people in the Great Depression, it's like they just did the best that they could. And they, learned their ways to cope with it and survive. And just because it's different than what, the kids after that need, it's like they did what they could and like they tried. And like there's some unforeseen consequences with the way that we all end up. I think my favorite like pictures ever, it was like this it was a book at Target, and it was these two candy heart pieces, and they have like, I don't know, things written on them, and it was like these two parents, and it was like, we'll never do what our parents did to you, and all this stuff. And then the baby's just like, oh, I'm gonna be messed up in my own. It's like we're all have an effect on our kids and the people around us. Most of it's probably unintended.
Yeah, I think that's such an important distinction to make, right? Because I'm picturing or I'm thinking about like the guy listening to this right now, or the woman, like, or the parent, the parent who thinks, wow, I have a kid, and here I was thinking I was meeting a need, or here I was thinking that I was trying to do the right thing, and feeling like a sense of shame around, oh my gosh, I'm this terrible person because I didn't meet that need in the way that I thought I was. Or when I told my kid to just get up, suck it up, and don't cry, I wanted them to be tough because the world's this hard place and you have to learn to kind of move through things. And I think it's important to say everyone's just doing the best they can with the tools that they have at a particular point in time. And none of the information that we're communicating is in any way to demonize our parents or anyone, teachers, coaches who have come along and didn't meet our emotional needs at one particular point in time. Like, likely, as you said, Daylen, they were well-intentioned, trying to do the best that they could. But as we all do, they miss the mark sometimes. We do it with our partners. We've done it with our friends. Like, I can't tell you the number of times I've not met the needs emotionally of people in my life. It's just the nature of how we perceive the world and everything. So, yeah, I think that's an important distinction to make for anyone listening to this.
Yeah, and like I really like how you pointed out. It's like this isn't to then like I don't want people to listen to this and go like, these 3 therapists told me that you don't know how to meet my needs, so therefore you're a terrible. No, that's definitely not what we're trying to do. But hopefully it can provide some insight, right, to understanding. Okay, these are the needs that I have met. These are the needs that I have, and these aren't being met for whatever reason. And then that provide information to you, right? This is information to understand yourself, and by understanding yourself more, you're then able to I think about it like interpreting data versus receiving data. Like if you put information into a computer, right? That's you're inputting data, and then if the computer then takes it, works through the formula, and then gives it back to you, the computer's interpreting it. So we're hoping that we can give you the data, give you the information, and then it's on you to take the information, really think about it, analyze how it makes you feel, and maybe think about yourself, and then hopefully come back next week and we can talk about it. Or hopefully it leads you to a place of greater understanding of self.
Yeah, maybe we could do that. So on this topic of attachment, as Daylen put it, it boils down to unmet needs, right? In our childhood, if we had needs that we didn't feel were met, then we make adaptations. We try to find a way that we can survive and get what we need to in our particular environment. So maybe the 3 of us can kind of share from our own personal experiences and make connections from how attachment has played out for us in the work that we've had to do to increase our threshold for emotional expression in our lives based on whatever unmet needs that we've experienced in our life. Would you guys be open to doing that?
Yeah, for sure.
It'd be very therapeutic.
Yeah. I can go first. I think for me, I was fortunate to have 2 great parents who I feel were very loving and supportive, and yeah, they had their issues, but overall, I probably got what I needed. But I feel the times that I felt abandoned or rejected or something like that was as I got kind of older in life. The teenage years, you start dating, and you get your feelings hurt, you get dumped, and then some barriers come up, and you got to work through that of learning how to trust someone in that way. We're all going to experience that. Regardless if our parents loved us and held us enough as we're kids, we're still going to feel pain and rejection as we get older at any point in our life. So, it can be from, getting picked last in dodgeball, not making the sports team for the tryout, getting dumped, as a senior in high school, right before graduation, whatever it is, something's going to come up that you are going to feel hurt by, and learning to overcome that and choose to be vulnerable again, because that's something we're all going to experience.
Right.
That's just Caleb said, part of the human condition.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, the example you used was in a relationship. You were in a relationship, or maybe several, if you're like me, probably several, where you allowed yourself to express love and closeness and intimacy with a person. Mm-hmm. That relationship ultimately led in you feeling rejected or lost because they dumped you. And so that emotion of love, closeness, intimacy was associated with pain. Because I got close and they dumped me, now I feel rejected. So there's pain associated with like expressing love and getting close to someone again. And
Yeah.
the work was like, how do I get back to that point where I can feel close with someone again in the future? Perfect. Yeah. I'll go next because I kind of have the opposite of, we talk about, okay, so that Daylen's example is how like love and the desire for closeness can kind of be repressed due to an experience. I think a common emotion that men have a love-hate relationship with can be anger, right? So one of the kind of hallmarks of my childhood was anger in my mind being perceived as this scary thing, as this thing that like I need to avoid feeling because my models for it, I would see my dad get angry, whether it be at me or even at someone else, and it would be these captured in these moments that made me go, whoa, that was scary. I don't want to do that, right? It was nothing crazy. I wasn't, physically abused, but, yelling, things that happened out in public, like altercations, verbal altercations that would happen. It just didn't make me feel very comfortable. So from a young age, I learned to associate anger with fear and discomfort. And so I wanted to avoid that feeling. Like, I don't want to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to feel fear. So I learned to like push down my anger. How that reared its head in like even adulthood now is I have to really challenge myself that when things happen to me that are unfair or unjust, it's hard for me to draw boundaries because I still have that tough relationship with anger, like allowing myself to say, no, I'm pissed off. This isn't right. You're not going to treat me this way. And doing so in a really healthy way is still really hard for me even to this day. So that's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum where an emotion like anger can kind of be associated with something that from a young age made it feel like, oh, survival wise, fear was really like built up in that emotion. So it's like, okay, let me put that emotion way over here. Let me just toss that in the back of the closet so I don't ever have to go there and feel that discomfort.
Yeah, and I think like hearing, I'm glad you did that, Jordan. And I think hearing you guys talk about what we would, in this current plane of existence, describe as opposite ends of the spectrum of the emotional wheel, really talk about how, it made us feel and how like we functioned or it caused dysfunction. And then we then have to like make our way back to equilibrium. The thing that I'm starting to like, I'm starting to like see and click and recognize more and more as we talk about emotion, particularly with men, is that like biologically and historically how some of these emotions have like worked, especially like fear. Like men are told not to, like, you can't be scared, you can't be fearful. I don't care who you are. Everyone on the face of the planet feels fear. You know why? Because it's a survival mechanism, right? It's how you use the fear. Because once fear happens, that happens in our limbic system, and it's in our animalistic brain. You can't control not feeling fear. If you could, that's a whole different diagnosis that we will leave for a different podcast. But once fear comes in, we typically kick into one or two, now three forms. It's fight, flight, or freeze, right? But like normal levels of fear were used to help us survive. Like when we were in the wilderness as cavemen, we understood that certain animals could not be like, you can maybe go after like the boar, but the lion was a no-no. And fear was that barometer to tell us that you see the lion, you run. You see the boar, maybe you fight, unless you get hurt and you get aggressive. Anger is the same thing. Anger was a motivation, and it's a signal, right? Anger tells you that something happened that was not right, or something happened that needs to be corrected. And that anger response is a signal from your brain to every part of your body that like your heart beats faster. You get more blood flow to every single part of your body. You almost stand taller. You hear stories of people kicking in and an adrenaline overload can like lift a car off of an injured person or push a 2-ton truck or something ridiculous like the humans are able to do because of that adrenaline dump that happens. So again, like feeling sadness because you were rejected isn't necessarily a weakness, and being able to feel anger isn't something that's wrong. These are just signals that are telling us, hey, something is going on. And I think, Daylen, you said it perfectly earlier. We've lost that ability, or at least we've lost the willingness to have a conversation about, hey, what's going on? There's a need that's happening here that's either being met or not being met. And your emotions are a response to that need being met or not being met.
Yeah, that's good.
I definitely use like that signal response all the time to explain it to clients, and even like really myself. Like every time I'm explaining something, I'm kind of reiterating it with myself of like, we have these natural physical responses that are telling us what's going on with the world around us, and if you're ignoring them, you're ignoring what you're supposed to do to survive. Like if you're ignoring that fear or that sadness or that anger, there's a reason you're doing it. So it only makes sense that you're listening to it. And when you don't listen to it, you're making bad decisions.
Yeah. Hearing it put this way, I think that's one of the big, for all three of us, like the big motivators for this podcast and the Men's Wellness Collective in general. When I hear it put this way, emotions as signals. Emotions are signals to tell us that we need something. And when I think about how disconnected a lot of men in today's day and age and historically have become from their emotions, I just picture a lot of men walking around not getting what they need. And it overwhelms me in emotion. In kind of as an example of emotional expression, I'm going to share, like it brings this really heavy feeling of sadness for all the men that are never going to share it, that I hope would maybe listen to something like this and at least feel it for themselves, but are just silently kind of carrying this burden of years and years and years of not even understanding how their emotions are there to help them, and therefore they're not getting what they need, whether it's healing or boundaries drawn for themselves or connection, intimacy. Like it weighs on me. It weighs on me in a way that I'm trying to use it in a healthy way, to do some stuff like this and have these conversations, to provide just a safe space where maybe a guy can come in here and listen to something like this and get what they need that day. But it's so true. Like that's all emotions are. They're here to help us. They're here to keep out the bad stuff and let in the good stuff that we need. They're synonymous with our immune system in that way. Like we think about our immune system as the physical mechanism for letting good vitamins and nutrients in, keeping out intruders that are going to harm us. Emotions are the same thing. Your anger is there to keep out mistreatment of you. Your happiness and your joy and your love are there to let in closeness with people that you can trust. And so I hope that people can take that away today. It's like, oh, a new way maybe to interact with the emotions that you probably shut off and didn't let yourself feel for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a great segue into the second half of the conversation we wanted to have, is like, how do we recognize and attune and like meet the needs that we have? And one of the things that we learned early in school is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I remember this was the first thing that I learned in like a Psych 101 class that like made it click. It finally made sense. I had this love-hate relationship with Maslow for a long time because it was like I saw the triangle, and at the top of the triangle was like boom, self-actualization. This is the peak of functioning. This is where you want to go. And then somewhere in like the subnotes, like the textbook was like, most people never actually reach self-actualization. And I was just like, damn it, if I'm not going to be the one to do it. But like, it's so true. And once I finally understood the concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I then needed to understand that like it fluctuates. I think there's this conceptualization. Even I took a long time to understand that like you can move up and down that triangle multiple times as you go through a lifetime, through your entire lifetime. There's things that can bump you up and down through your own volition and through like just the world being the world.
I'd say even in a day, right? Not to cut you off, but like I could wake up in the morning and do like a gratitude practice and feel like, oh, I feel so connected and there's this like feeling of love around me. But if 2 o'clock has come and I haven't eaten, like throw all that out the window. Like you need some food right now.
Exactly. You know? Exactly. And so I'll go ahead and break down the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so it starts with like, so it's essentially imagine a pyramid in your mind, and it's broken down into 5 different sections. And the concept of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, is like you need to meet the lower parts of the pyramid in order to get to the tip of the pyramid. And so the basic underlying foundation of like human need is your physiological needs, right? Do you have air, water, food, shelter? Did you sleep, clothing? Are you like the basic, like the absolute basic of humanity? Like, do you have food? Are you like, do you have a place to sleep? And so some of these things like we get so accustomed to, especially living, I think, in Western America, and like for us in particular, living in the Midwest, for the majority of the year, unless it's tornado season, we really don't have too much to worry about when it comes to like shelter. If you're fortunate enough to be in a position where you have shelter and it's provided for you, or you're able to take care of yourself in that way. Obviously, we want to recognize that there are plenty of people who, through life circumstances, their own actions and actions beyond their own control, don't have shelter. But for the most part, housing isn't something we have to worry about. But if you live on the coasts, Florida, hurricane season, every year you have to worry about if you're gonna have a house or not. I didn't even think about this, but like California, they've had like fires all summer for 5 years in a row. And so like you can begin to understand how like the fear of losing your home impacts your functioning in all these other areas. And then so moving up from there, then you have your safety needs, personal security. Like, are you in a home? Are you safe? Are you like physical danger? Is that a constant worry? Like employment, resources, health. And then they say property. That could be broken down into like, okay, like not necessarily like, do you own property, but like, do you have things that you care about? Do you have a home? Do you have an apartment? Are you like, that's safety needs. But like, then the things in your home, like, are you comfortable? Can you be taken care of? Like, do you live in a neighborhood to where like, you know, it's peaceful? You think about like people who live in the cities, anxiety levels typically a little bit higher than people who live in rural areas of the country. Why? Helicopter, noise, guns, police, ambulances. These things just affect, again, sleep and some of the other more physiological needs as we talked about. But for the most part, they don't affect most people beyond normal functioning. And then we go into issues of longing and belonging, love, friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection. Do you have people who are safe that you can connect with? Are you in community with people that you can be in activities with, where it's basketball league, crew, or rowing, or roller derby, or anime club, or are you in the esports, or whatever it is? Do you have a place where you feel like you can receive love and belonging? It's quintessential to the human experience. Like humans are designed and built and function based off connection. And then once you have those need met, you have esteem needs. So respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, freedom. Do you feel like you're a valuable person? Are the things that you have allowing you to feel like you're worthy? Do you have status in your job? Do you have recognition for what you do? And then at the top of the pyramid, we get all the way to desire to become the best you can be, which is self-actualization, the tip of the pyramid, Pikes Peak, whatever, Mount Everest, the very top. Once you can meet all those needs, and I'm so glad you pointed this out, Jordan, on a daily basis almost. Once you can reach all those needs on a daily basis, then you're able to be your truest, freest self right at the top of that pyramid. And Maslow really points out that a lot of the times we get stuck. And sometimes, like, unless we're able to step back and recognize that there's a need not being met where we are, or a need below where we are that needs to be met, we're just not going to be able to achieve that next goal, right?
Yeah.
Caleb, as you were talking that, I was just thinking of like where people I know in my life and clients, and just I think men on a greater scale, like I feel like you lost a lot of them like halfway up the pyramid.
Yeah.
Like it was like they might have some of that, and it's like some days I don't have it. Some days I'm just like, wow, there's like so much more work, like for all of us. And I'm not saying like that we've got it figured out. Like there's some days, yeah, I've got my nutrition needs met, and that's about it. And I completed that, and that's the best I could do that day. But like, there is so much work that you have to do consistently to get all the way to the top. And I feel like we've kind of hit like a plateau, about halfway up the pyramid, just as a general group of people, as men.
Which I think that's what Maslow was probably referring to. I think we honestly get to a certain point and just plateau. Like, I'll be honest, at this point in my life, when I look at this pyramid, I wake up on level 3. That takes to me, I didn't even realize that until I was talking through it. I wake up on level 3 because I wake up, I can go in my kitchen, I can make food. I just made some chicken breast and some broccoli. I'm trying to be healthy. Want to take care of myself so I can self-actualize. But I wake up on level 3 because I know I live in a safe neighborhood. I can go eat and I can provide for myself anytime I want. So I wake up trying to meet my love and belonging needs. And so it's easier for me to reach the top of the triangle. But I can also imagine someone who wakes up on the bottom of the pyramid, and every day it's a journey up, right? It's a journey up. And I'm sure there's some people who like wake up at the top of the pyramid and then it's like straight down, and then they got to build themselves back up, and it's this up and down journey. And one of the things about the human body, particularly the human mind, that I think a lot of people like experience but don't really have the words to verbalize, is like the human body loves equilibrium, which means normalcy. And so you'll fall into patterns. And so if you're not able to recognize that, I'm maybe going up and down, or I'm stuck, you don't even know that there's other levels to what you're doing. You just know that this is what you do. This is how you've always done it. Yeah, it's like that. This is what was always done. This is how it's always done. Let's not mess anything up, because it is hard to like say, okay, I have this need, and I need other people, or I need to hold myself accountable in order to get this need met. And the hardest thing about the love and belonging need, it is impossible to meet that on your own.
Yeah. I thought of something, and I wanted to challenge you on it. But first, I have a question. Daylen, you talked about plateauing, right? And losing kind of people halfway up the pyramid. When you think about men and the people, maybe for your own self or the people in your life, like where do you feel like we get stuck mostly? Like what sticks out for you, and what level sticks out for you is that?
I think it was kind of like where Caleb was talking of like the love and connection of just like we try and do so much of it on our own. And it's like we can do it to a point, and then we got to be stoic. We got to do it on our own. You got to kind of white knuckle it through whatever it is that you're going through. Of like, I'm so angry, but I can't be angry, and I'm going to shove it down and just get through the day to day because this is what I've always done. This is how my dad told me to do it. This is how his dad did it, and I'm going to do it this way because I have to. And then you're alone and you're doing it that way.
Yeah. I asked because so that's helpful. So you kind of both see it as level 3 is kind of the trip up spot. I think of it a little differently. I think it's level 2 for me, of like, I think, and I'm using it from my own experience, and that's kind of the lens that I'm going to think about men from for a second. The kind of second level talks less about physiological safety and more of psychological safety. Do I feel safe? Whether it's because I live in a good neighborhood, or even like in a relationship, like, do I feel safe interacting with the people around me? And when I think about men, just from my own experience, men in my life that I talk with, or close friends of mine, and then when I peel back and look at the broader landscape of men today, I think that's where we get stuck, because we don't feel safe. It's like an internal battle, I think, to go out and, I don't know about you two, but for me, I'm like trying to like determine or develop this script of, even if I feel really good about myself, right? Like Jordan just sitting here, the essence of who I am, I can sit in a room and feel really good about that. And then the minute I walk out the door, I may encounter or come upon an interaction with another individual, and immediately I'm running through this script in my head of like, it sounds crazy, but like, what's a man to do in this situation, right? If I'm taking a walk with my partner, okay, the man's on the outside of the sidewalk, closest to the street. Okay, if we want to stop into this coffee shop and get something, okay, man's gonna hold the door. Man has to, do I pay? Do I let her pay because I want to be empowering and I'm not misogynistic? Like, all this stuff goes on that I think creates an element of like non-safety internally with ourselves.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to fit the script of what a man's supposed to be, like what a good guy does. At least for me. So like, I think if I can find that internal safety or sense of safety out in the world, then the rest of like the pyramid opens up. I can connect with people because I have that sense of safety within myself. So then I'm open to that connection, love, and belonging. Then I'm open to that self-esteem. Then I'm open to that self-actualization. But if I don't conquer that level of like safety psychologically, I can't ever get there.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important aspect to bring up, right? There's different requirements to meeting all these needs, right? Some of these needs are met psychologically. Some of these needs are met physically. Like, you gotta eat. That is a physical need. You just gotta go get food. That's a physical need that could be met. But like, so much of the esteem and belonging, like, that's psychological and emotional, right? So like, it really does bring into totality the human experience. Like, if you're going to self-actualize every day, you've got to exercise every single aspect of your existence as a person, which is why I think it's so important that, particularly as men, I think we can exercise the physical, we can even exercise the psychological, but the emotional piece is where we get bogged down, which is where I think we get stuck, and then we again fall into a cycle. And it's like, you can't get to that esteem need because you're stuck in the emotional need. And because you don't know your emotions, you can't understand why you're stuck. And that leads to frustration. And it just begins to, it begets more frustration and frustration.
Yeah, because the emotions, at least the way I think about it, like it's the way we relate to our emotional selves, the way we've been taught to relate to our emotional self, that creates that sense of unsafety.
100%, yes. Absolutely.
Because I might go out in the world and say, okay, I gotta walk on the outside of the sidewalk, but man, I'm scared. If a car comes, like, I'm scared, but I can't. But that fear emotion creates the tension. I can't be scared. I got to do this, right? Silly, kind of a real small example, but that's what I think creates so much of the tension and the feeling of unsafety in the world. Is we haven't developed skills to reclaim our emotional identity.
Yeah. And so as we begin to wrap up, I want to ask you guys, we've talked so much about emotional recognition and then skills as to be able to actually enact some of this stuff. Like, it just doesn't happen by accident. At least for me, it most certainly did not. The ability to recognize my emotion came out of what I will just call the gulag after just quite honestly going through it, getting to a point where I needed help and went and sought it out. But I always innately knew. I always innately knew that I was more tapped in, is what I said. I was just able to connect with people more. I was the guy that everyone came to talk to about their problems because I could always process the stuff with them. But I could never really fully process it with myself. So for you guys, and maybe this could be helpful to the audience and people listening, what was that process like for you, recognizing that you had this need that wasn't being met, and like how did you go about recognizing it and like meeting that need, or like polishing off that skill that enabled you to do what it is that you guys do now?
Oh, you go ahead, Daylen, if something comes to you.
Yeah, I think for me, it was kind of learning from my own failures of my actions and behaviors and thoughts weren't positive to those around me, and I wasn't being a great person. I always said I was like a nice guy, but I wasn't a good person. Like, I was nice and friendly, and everyone likes me, but like, there was some things in my life that I was really questioning, like, why am I doing this? Like, this isn't good. And taking kind of an honest look at, like, okay, I'm doing this for a reason. Because all of us, we have emotions for a reason. We do certain things for a reason. Be able to take an honest look and be like, okay, I need to know more about myself so I can make a better decision about how I want to treat people, how I want to be presented in the world, and just kind of take that introspection and sit with that for a little while. And then it kind of took some other people challenging me a little bit and pushing and like asking, and it was, my wife, girlfriend at the time, now wife, like, she was kind of the one who led that charge. And then now I've kind of done it on my own. I've sought that out with friends. I've started my own therapy. I've wanted to understand myself and make myself uncomfortable, because it is uncomfortable to understand your emotions and to feel those things. But if I can be a little bit uncomfortable in the short term, I'm better in the long term.
How did you initially push past the initial pain? Like, when I heard you say, I just didn't like the way I was treating people. Like, that's painful to really take that hard, honest look at yourself and take accountability for the fact that, like, you're not where you wanted to be. Do you think that's innate? Like, that was just always part of you, or what triggered that?
I think it was just a recognition of, like, I didn't want to do what I was doing anymore. And, like, I thought I was better than where I was. And so it was this desire to change, because, I was motivated to change and I wanted to change, and I could have just stayed where I was. But I think for me, having given values as a kid and feeling like I strayed from that a little bit, it just kind of made me look at myself and not necessarily like what I saw in some ways. But it was just a recognition of I needed to change in some ways. Not completely, because there was still, a good chunk of me that I really liked and I really loved. But there was just pieces of it that it was just, I wanted to change.
Yeah. Yeah, the pain of not feeling aligned was enough.
Yeah. I think, the incongruence is, the word that we always love in counseling, is just, it didn't feel right. I didn't feel like I was being myself. And it just felt icky, when you do something and it seems like everyone else wanted you to do that, but then it happened and you're like, wow, no, that wasn't good.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing and answering my follow-ups. To answer your initial question, Caleb, I think my experience was similar. So I grew up in athletics. I grew up being very highly motivated to do well in school, do well in sports. Um, and for most of my life, I kind of followed this kind of method of if I know what needs to be done, all I gotta do is put the work in and do those things and follow kind of this process, and success will come. And I gotten really used to that. So there wasn't a whole lot of introspection because it was methodology. It was, I don't need to think about why I'm doing anything. Give me the list of things to do that's going to yield, it's like a recipe. Follow steps 1 through 8, then good thing will result, whether that's in school, sports. And I kind of thought that applied everywhere. But life's more complex than that. So I had a series of like experiences, largely relationally in my previous relationship, where I thought I was following the rule book, and success was not the outcome. And that kind of like just rocked everything because it was the whole sort of worldview that I had. Didn't pan out anymore. You could do all the right things and things still not work out. And so that kind of was the big wake up call for me to kind of reflect back to like do a whole overhaul introspectively of why I was doing certain things, why I was following certain steps or guidelines. And so for me, it was just once I started pulling on that yarn and uncovering things, the pulling hasn't stopped.
Yeah.
And so
Just
that big ball of yarn that was once me is just, I think, unraveling like daily. And hopefully there will be a point where, and not to say it's negative, like I'm losing my sense of who I am. In fact, the more I unravel the ball of yarn, I realize that the yarn was all the extra stuff. And who I am is slowly kind of like uncovering itself, and it's somewhere deeper inside the ball of yarn that I can't pull away from. Like I don't know, if the ball of yarn had like a core on the inside of it that's not made of yarn, like wood, a wood spool inside, like that's me. So I'm just like slowly revealing those pieces of myself throughout the process. And it's made it more easy for me to express myself emotionally because I know where the emotion's coming from. And if it feels like me, then it's like, well, I have no other choice really but to express it, even if it feels uncomfortable. So, yeah, similar to Daylen, that'd be my thing. A series of failures that then caused me to go like, that shouldn't have went that way. But why did it?
Why did it? Yeah. Why did it? I think that's where it all starts. Is like, what or why is usually how I feel like either something happened or something caused you to reflect. So what or why are we in the situation that we're in now? And for me, it came from a position of being overwhelmed and admitting that I no longer was able to handle it on my own. After just what felt like a series of constant setbacks, right? And like trying to quote unquote be a man and handle it the way I knew how, I got to a point where I was honest enough with myself to say, I can't handle this anymore on my own. I need help to sort through whatever is going on internally. I've always been I always said I feel like I've always had high emotional intelligence, and I've always known like that I could handle a lot emotionally. But there was, after the loss of my grandmother, who was one of the closest people to me in my entire life, everything just got a little bit heavier. Everything got a little bit tougher. The only way I could describe it, it's like walking through a swamp in full army fatigues while carrying like a bag full of rocks. Like every step was just like another rock was in the backpack, and the swamp just got deeper and deeper and deeper. And I recognized that something had to go somewhere. And I was in school at the time, and it was like, all right, cool. I'm not going to be able to be successful at school, so I need to stop this, figure myself out, and come back. And that, honestly, looking back, kind of always been my pattern. When things got too heavy, I would step away, go figure myself out, come back, and finish it up. Until somebody else interrupted the pattern for me, gave me another direction. And that's when I went and got help. I began my own personal counseling. And then almost in like the first 3 sessions, even though I was in school for counseling, I had an associate at this point. I had 2.5 years worth of coursework. I was almost done. I think I had like a semester and a half left. Everything that I was learning cognitively clicked because it was no longer theory, right? I wasn't just learning about Maslow's. I wasn't just learning about the hierarchy of needs. I wasn't learning about attachment style. I wasn't just doing learning all these things. It was like someone just like turned on the light in a dark room, and it was like a mirror was in front of me. It then applied to me. All the content flipped, and it was just like, boom, you are the content. Like, look how you are living in the content. And I went, oh, okay, this is all it is. And then I think that for me was the point where I was like, oh, okay, I have this need because of this. Like, for me, I legit think I have physical touch as a primary love language because as a kid, I was born with sickle cell, and I was always sick, and like the women that were around me would always just hold me and make me feel comfortable because like medication could only work for so long, and they couldn't over medicate me, so they would just hold me to make me feel comfortable. Yeah. The dot connected. Like, but I never in 2 million years would I have ever made those connections as to my primary love language being attached to my basic need and my secure attachment to the people around me, had I not come to a place where I was overwhelmed, overworked, and just doing too much, and then like honestly, like I would have had to do it anyway because you can't drop out without going talking to somebody. So I had to go talk to the dean. But then I heeded his advice. I followed his advice. I went and got help. And then that was like the giant turning point for me. And then that's been the turning point for like my entire emotional and healing journey. And that's where I went and got tools. That's where the tools then became like Batman's utility belt. Like, these are things that I use on a daily basis that I almost don't even recognize I use anymore because they've become core to who I am.
There. Man, go ahead, Daylen.
I was say, Caleb, I loved how you said at the beginning, kind of ended like you were overwhelmed and you needed help. And like I feel like that is such a big thing that like is the core of like your experience and like what we all need is, and it's okay to say that. And like I don't think that you're weak at all for admitting that you need help. I think it's really brave, and I respect you a whole lot more. Even though I already did a lot, like it just went up like a little bit more just to hear the words. But like I don't know, I just wanted to highlight that like you admitted that you needed help.
Yeah, that's huge. And if I could maybe put a bow on it and attach what you shared with our overall discussion today. You talked about how you were able to sort of connect the dots. And all 3 of us talked about the question of trying to figure out what and why were kind of like the big questions that we were seeking to answer. And so for someone listening to this, what I had to do today, right, is for men who struggle with emotional expression, whether it's expressing anger, sadness, happiness, love, whatever emotion it is that kind of has this, there's a hitch in it for you. There's a roadblock to really going there and feeling it. Today's discussion was just throwing some common things out there for you to reflect on and go, oh, maybe that's why. Maybe there's some unmet need that has contributed to me shutting off certain parts of my emotional self. Maybe the way I grew up, survival was emphasized over connection, or whatever the case might be. thinking about your life and where you are today through this lens of how attachment and just our need to survive and be safe in the world may be at play in why certain emotions don't feel accessible to you. That was really our goal, was just to kind of give you a way to look at yourself and to think like, oh, some understanding. Like maybe that's why that's this way. So next time, whether it's your partner, your boss, or your friends saying, why can't you just tell me you love me? Or why can't you, you know, go to this emotional place, you can maybe have a frame of reference and a deeper understanding for yourself as to why that is.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think this project and this podcast and everything we do from here on is to do one thing, is to help facilitate conversations that typically we don't see being had in a healthy way. And like, I appreciate you saying that it doesn't make me weak. I honestly feel better and stronger and more emotionally mature than I ever have in my entire life. I am the best version of me now because I was able to accept the version of me then, right? The reason I'm at the mountaintop now, at this particular moment, is because I accepted the valley when I was in it. And like, it takes more strength to accept that you're in a valley than to get to the mountaintop. I'll say, and I'll leave it on that, because what it takes to get from there to the top is consistency and work. But to accept that you are in that dark place, hardest thing, I think probably one of the hardest things we'll ever do as humans. And we hope that by producing this kind of content and showing you that it is okay to understand yourself, your emotions, and your well-being, that you will also be able to recognize and do what you need to do for yourself, and recognize yourself and see yourself in the valley, and hopefully one day find yourself at the mountaintop.
That's fire.
I think that's great. I think this can just kind of wrap up this conversation. I think it was great. I went way longer than I thought we were going to. But I appreciate everybody listening. You know, if you like this podcast, please follow it, share it with someone you like, and just be like, hey, this is a different alternative, and it spoke to me, and I think you would really appreciate it. So just share with your friends, follow us, and we'll catch you next time.
Later.